We've been privileged with a slew of awesome superhero movies over the past decade of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Countless times, we've seen those heroes risk their lives to save the day and defeat their foes. But you ever stop to wonder how they're able to afford such lifestyles? Like, there's no designated salary for a superhero, is there? I don't think so. And as a result, these characters definitely need to find alternative ways to make money because they still got bills to pay, you know? The studio never really explains how these individuals manage to get by. They dedicate their lives to upholding justice and protecting the world from dangerous threats, but how are they paying rent? Where's Hawkeye getting all these arrows from? Where does Captain America go to sleep at night? How do all of these heroes afford to live the way that they do, and who's funding all of their heroic endeavors? Today, we're going to be breaking down exactly how superheroes survive without an income. We know that S.H.I.E.L.D. is a government agency, so perhaps the Avengers are a government-funded subsidiary of that. Still, it's tough to imagine Nick Fury is signing a paycheck and handing it over to Thor, the God of Thunder. Also, what would a fair salary be for an Avenger? Obviously, they deserve to be making millions of dollars for saving the universe. Unfortunately, not everyone who deserves to be making millions of dollars always does. Just look at teachers, firefighters, and YouTube movie theorists. Then again, if you were to tell me that the Avengers make a modest teacher salary, I'd be pretty sad while also not that shocked. After all, if this is a government-funded project, I doubt the pay is astronomical. Unless Tony Stark is involved. We already know that he funds a ton of the Avengers' endeavors, like their tech and their facilities, but does he actually pay the individuals as well? The Avengers' original facility, the Avengers Tower skyscraper in the heart of New York, was originally Stark Tower. The team then moved their home base to a much larger compound, which we can only assume Tony also footed the bill for. It would stand to reason that all of these Avengers' assets, like their facilities, all their tech and vehicles, and every paperclip in between, is owned by Tony Stark. I mean, Thor brings his own hammer from home, but everything else is Tony's. That would mean that Tony Stark isn't just a member of the team, but he's actually their boss all along. That just, doesn't feel right. Plus, if that were the case, and knowing Tony's capitalistic mentality, he probably wasn't even paying them a fair wage. We know that Black Widow and Captain America both worked pretty much full-time in the Avengers facility. In Endgame, we see Natasha holding down the fort, checking in with other heroes from across the cosmos for status updates. It's almost like she's the ringleader of this giant superhero network. If these two are clocking in on a daily basis and actually working out of the office, making calls and filing paperwork and that sort of nonsense, then they must be getting paid somehow. But are they making the same amount as Bruce Banner or Thor, who only seem to show up when they're needed? Or even the same amount as Tony Stark, who definitely does not need the money? Come to think of it, in Civil War, Captain America becomes a fugitive and an enemy of the state. There's absolutely no chance that he was still collecting checks from the government while adamantly opposed to them as well. Plus, that would mean that all of the heroes that took his side and ended up on the run as well probably lost their income by making that choice. When you consider that, taking Steve's side in that conflict was actually a much larger risk than previously insinuated. Also in Civil War, Tony chooses Peter Parker for an Avengers internship. By that logic, it implies that there's a paid position in the future. You don't intern somewhere that isn't considered a job, otherwise that's volunteering. Therefore, there must be such a thing as a full-time superhero. At least Clint Barton, or Hawkeye, used to work for S.H.I.E.L.D. That explains how his family has that dope hideaway house, because that thing on that much land is certainly not cheap. Quick side note, imagine having to live in a secret location in the middle of nowhere because your husband or your dad is constantly off fighting evil aliens. That sounds like a pretty crappy deal to me. This brings me to an interesting point. For a lot of these heroes, fighting off bad guys is only part of who they are. Many of them have fulfilling lives separate from their hero duties. Some others live less fulfilling lives, but still work jobs nonetheless. For a prime example, look no further than Tony Stark. Sure, we know him as Iron Man, the guy who saves the day over and over again, but we don't see the genius businessman who probably works like 80, 90-hour weeks negotiating deals and overall running a multi-billion-dollar company. I know that Pepper Potts takes care of a lot of things, but it's not like Tony is completely and utterly removed from Stark Industries. Aside from owning his own company, Tony also works for the US Defense Department, he clearly owns a slew of property, and is the part owner of Damage Control, a company that cleans up the mess after all these epic hero versus villain showdowns. That's more than enough to keep those pockets of his full to the brim. Another hero who never needs to worry about money is T'Challa, the king of Wakanda. He's the leader of one of the wealthiest nations known to mankind. They just recently opened up their borders to the rest of the world, so one would assume that their profits are about to skyrocket now that they can start exporting valuable materials like vibranium. Money is quite literally the least of T'Challa's worries. Speaking of Wakanda, Bucky Barnes also appears to live there on some sort of ranch as like a quiet farmer with one arm. This is before he gets pulled back into action, of course. Prior to Infinity War, he was just enjoying a peaceful life, almost like living on a commune. His food and shelter appeared to be taken care of in exchange for manual labor, I presume. That's a pretty good setup for a guy from the 1940s who was not too long ago brainwashed into attacking his best friend. Maybe laying low is not a bad call. Said best friend, Captain America, is another curious case. For starters, he was in the US Army in the 1940s, so he could very well be collecting a pension. However, currently, he doesn't appear to have a normal day job. Then again, he's also pretty famous. He performed on countless USO tours and seemed to have quite a bit of merchandise with his trademark slapped all over them. Even Agent Coulson asked Steve Rogers to sign one of his Captain America trading cards from when he was a kid. With that many licensed products on the market, you've got to assume he's collecting a bit of change from the royalties. A similar case can be made for Spider-Man. In Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, they frequently mention how many toys and lunchboxes with his face on them exist. He's internationally known as a famous superhero, so naturally, he's plastered all over comic books, mugs, and t-shirts. He's probably making a pretty penny off merchandise as well. However, the Peter Parker version in the MCU is a different story. He's still a student, so that explains why he isn't working a job anywhere. He also lives in a pretty cruddy apartment with his Aunt May, so they definitely aren't raking in any big bucks. Imagine the next Spider-Man movie is about Peter Parker having to quit being Spider-Man because he graduates high school and has to go get a real job. Then there's Bruce Banner, the Incredible Hulk. He too is quite the celebrity. Beyond getting stopped for selfies while trying to enjoy a meal in public, he even has his own ice cream flavor with Ben & Jerry's. Plus, the guy used to be a renowned nuclear scientist. I'm sure he was making a decent wage back in those days. Hopefully he was able to stash some of that money to live off of now, because since turning into the Hulk and joining the Avengers, his life has been a non-stop whirlwind of travel, including off-planet travel. It's tough to hold down a job with that sort of schedule. Much like the Hulk used to be a nuclear scientist before the hero life came a-knockin', Stephen Strange used to be a world-renowned surgeon. You just know he was raking in the big bucks with a job like that. Did you see his apartment in that first Doctor Strange movie? The guy was rolling. Unfortunately, a horrible car accident robbed him of his livelihood and sent him down a path of magic and fancy spells that would forever change him as a person. In fact, I take back unfortunately. Sure, the accident was brutal and I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but he also was kind of a jerk before it happened and needed to turn a new leaf and become a new man. These days, he appears to work as the manager of some sort of weird magic museum in New York, where I think he works, studies, and sleeps. I think he lives there. In the Doctor Strange movie, we know that he used the last of his savings to travel in search of help, and that's when he encounters the Ancient One and begins the process of becoming the Sorcerer Supreme. That's all fine and well, but where's his money coming from now? If he used it all up in that movie, then How on earth did he get home, and how does he survive on a day-to-day basis now? He and Wong must be making some sort of salary from the sanctum they oversee. Who's paying that salary? I have no clue. Finally, there's Ant-Man. Scott Lang is a former bank robber, which can be a lucrative career if you're good at it. Emphasis on if you're good at it, because he certainly wasn't good enough. He got caught and sent to prison, and when he came out, he had nothing. He ends up getting a job scooping ice cream at Baskin-Robbins in order to get by. At least he didn't have to scoop the Hulk flavor, though. Scott also owns a pretty decently sized home in San Francisco where the housing market is astronomical, so at least he's got something of value to his name. How do you think these superheroes survive without making money? Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Is there something we may have missed or an important detail that explains this better? Let us know. Before you go, make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to Behind the Screen to stay up to date on all of our latest releases. Until next time, bye!